Good afternoon. I'm Paul Miles with Grace Abroad Ministries. We are typically based out of Kiev, Ukraine, due to Russia's genocide of the Ukrainian people as part of the Russian struggle against the West. My family and I are currently located in Arkansas, and it's a thrill to be here in Tacoma with you today. We've got some handouts in the back. We've got a sign-up sheet in the back as well for a newsletter that we send out every now and then. We'd love to stay in touch with you. The topic is cosmology and the Noahic Covenant. A feature of this title is that the word cosmology starts with the same two letters as the word covenant. Cosmology typically deals with everything in the cosmos, right? Not just the planet Earth, but outer space as well. So there's a sense in which we could frame everything as being within cosmology. Maybe a bit more of a restricted topic might be social ontology. However, social ontology and the Noahic Covenant doesn't sound as cool as cosmology and the Noahic Covenant. So I'm working on a PhD in applied apologetics right now. I mentioned our situation with the war in Ukraine. The topic of my dissertation is the Russist ideology, the political theory, the religion that is fueling Russia's angst against the West and the genocide of the Ukrainian people. I'm building a refutation of this based off of God's design for society in terms of the individual, the family, and the country. If you were here last year, we discussed the divine institutions. Basically, I'm taking that theology and weaponizing it against Putin. Long story short. So in this talk, we're going to look at a particular matter within this topic. First, we're going to look at the social ontology context of Genesis 1 through 11. Then we're going to look at the Noahic Covenant and the Tower of Babel, there from right after the flood to the global dispersion. And then we're going to look at the establishment of countries. I think that if we take a look at what's happening at this time on planet Earth, we will notice that if we interpret the grid of the fossil record and geology through the grid of scriptures, we can understand a lot of really interesting phenomena happening to planet Earth. Okay, that by way of introduction. I've thrown this term social ontology around a couple of times. That's a pretty fancy term. What does it mean? Brian Epstein is a philosopher. I have no reason to suspect that he might be a Christian, but he's written books and done TED Talks on the topic of social ontology, and I think he defines the concept well. Social ontology is the study of the nature of the social world. What is X? Social ontology asks, where X stands for any social thing, whatever. So social ontologists study topics like this. What is money? What are institutions? What are social groups? What's a credit card? What are contracts? How do they work? What are churches, families, government, right? These are the topics of social ontology, and everybody deals with these questions. Now, as Christians, I think we can approach the topic of social ontology a bit uniquely. We can ask a bit of a different question. We can say, what is God's design for society? We believe in an intelligent designer who is God. Has God designed social issues in a particular way? I would argue that yes, he has. And I think we can look at the Bible and discern that God has designed three basic units of society. These three units are things that we are all members of by default. They are the individual, the family, and the country. Okay? By default, we should be members of all three of these. Now, of course, I understand that there are orphans who are born in a situation where there's no present father and the mother dies in childbirth. Those are unfortunate situations. Or if you're born at sea on a pirate ship, maybe you don't belong to a country. But it is God's design that we are a part of all three of these. So let's take a look at the first two, the individual and the family. These are developed within the context of the Garden of Eden, when God said it is good, before we get into the country, which is where the meat of the Noahic Covenant comes into the discussion. So first is the individual, right? What is a person? What is a man? These are questions that philosophers have argued about for millennia. In fact, there is a famous anecdote of a conversation between Plato and Diogenes, in which Plato defined a man as a featherless biped, creature having two legs but no feathers. So Diogenes, who is the original troll, strolls up into the school with a rooster that he had plucked and says, "Oh, looky here, it is Plato's man, a plucked rooster." So Plato had to redefine man to have broad, flat nails. And of course, this is Tacoma, so I get to use AI to develop a philosophical debate within the streets of Tacoma with a plucked chicken. So that's what the Greek philosophers are doing. What's the difference between a plucked chicken and a man? Is it just the nails, or is there something else? According to the Bible, there is a big something else. The Bible tells us about God's creation of man and his design for man. In Genesis 1, 26 through 28, we get the first bit of information about the creation of man. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness." Okay, so that's something unique about man that's not said about anything else. We are created in the image of God. "Let them rule over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the sky, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." Notice, God is creating man in his own image, and also he is putting man above nature. We are of more value than the animals because we have God's image, and in the Garden of Eden, we were put in a position of authority over them. God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. This must be a textual error because there's only two genders mentioned. God designed male and female, and it's unfortunate that we're struggling with this in society. And a lot of people, I think often with good intentions, but often with really unfortunate backstories, have difficulty understanding God's design for their sex. And I think that the Bible gives us a lot of information about this, that indeed we have male and female, and we need to align ourselves properly. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it." Not everybody realizes this, but the first command ever given to man is to produce more men, right? "Fill the earth and subdue it, and rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over every living thing that moves on earth." So we are here to rule over the planet, over the nature, over the natural world. Further, we see in the next chapter that God puts man in the garden and gives him a mortar of responsibility to tend the garden and to keep the garden as a protector. We're given a particular responsibility. We're told not to eat from the forbidden tree, and in the day that Adam eats of it, he will die. Further in chapter 2, "Out of the ground the Lord formed every animal of the field and every bird of the sky and brought them to man to see what man would call them. So Adam gave names to the animals." By naming the animals, this is an act of Adam exerting his authority over the animals because he's in a position to give them names. So what are some things that we're seeing about the individual as we read the biblical narrative about God's design for us? One big issue that keeps popping up that might be a little controversial here in Washington is simply that the individual, the image bearer, is superior to nature. Okay? We are of greater value than nature. It's not that we're just part of nature or that we are in nature, that we are nature. We are above nature. This doesn't mean that we're in a position where we're allowed to abuse nature. Rather, it does carry certain responsibilities with it. But we must understand that man is above nature. Much of the green movement that we're hearing talk about tries to reposition us, to lower us, and to elevate nature so that we and nature are one and the same. Does that make sense? Do you see the difference? Okay. So that's the first basic unit, is the individual. It's the one that is most intimate to each of us because I and only I am I. There's often a tendency in the world to try to externalize all of your problems and responsibility, right? I am the victim. It is society that's bent against me. I can't change society, so I need to sit back and whine. In the biblical worldview, God has designed individuals with particular responsibility so that we can rise to our occasion and improve ourselves first and improve the world by improving ourselves. Okay, the next basic unit of society in God's design is the family. As we read further in Genesis, we see that out of the ground, the Lord formed all the animals, right? Adam names them, but of all the animals, there are no partners suitable for Adam. So God caused a deep sleep to fall upon Adam, and as he slept, God took out one of his ribs, closed up the flesh, and then used that material to form a wife. And the first words of man recorded are Adam praising this wonderful creature that God has created for him. He says, "This is now a bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man." And then here in Genesis 2:24 through 25, we get the definition of, if you will, of marriage. "Therefore man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh." And it continues, "They were both naked, the man and the wife, and they were unashamed." So that is the basis for the family. So there are two basic relationships that we see in the family that were just mentioned there in verse 24. The first is the marital relationship, and the second is the parental relationship. So in a marriage, the two become one flesh, and if they are fruitful and multiply, as God has commanded, the result is children within this family unit. Now the children will grow up, and meanwhile, an adjacent family will have a marriage and children that grow up, and then it says that a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife. So a man from one family and a woman from another family will join together, become married, and that will form a new family unit. And then they can produce offspring to form new family units as well. Now, the fact that they're a new unit does not cancel their relationship with their original parents. Jesus has some very interesting statements about that in Mark chapter 8, by the way. But that is basically how this next unit of society, the family, functions. Okay. Now, the individual and the family are two units that God has designed in the Garden of Eden. Okay, and on the end of day 6, excuse me, God says it is good, right? These are units of society, part of God's design, part of the biblical social ontology in the ideal state. These date to before sin. However, unfortunately, sin has entered the world. And so we get further into the narrative, and it is after sin enters that God forms another bit of design in society, and that is the country. Okay, so Genesis 6, 5 through 8. We've skipped several chapters from 3 all the way up to 6. But we've gotten to a point in the post-flood world where the Lord saw that the wickedness of mankind was great on the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of their heart was only evil continually. And so God decides to destroy the world. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. So God tells Noah to build the ark, and he fills it with the animals by twos, except for a handful, which were done by fives. And they enter the ark, and then the flood comes, and the ark survives. So after that, we get to Genesis 8:18. So Noah went out, and his sons, and his wife, and his sons' wives with them. Every animal, every crawling thing, and every bird, everything that moves on the ark, went out by their families from the ark. Interesting that they went in pairs, and they're coming out in families. That would suggest that there were births of animals on the ark. Which is kind of interesting. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord and took some of every kind of clean animal and some of every clean bird and offered burnt offerings on the altar. The Lord smelled the soothing aroma, and the Lord said to himself, I will never again curse the ground on account of man, for the intent of man's heart is evil from his youth, and I will never again destroy every living thing as I have done. And God makes this statement, while the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease. Now there is a lot of concern right now about climate change. I think there is plenty of reason to accept that, yes, the climate is changing. Maybe you could even build a case that human activity is a contributing factor to the changing climate. However, what we're seeing, I think, is a bit misinformed. For example, we're having articles such as these talking about how we are approaching an uninhabitable Earth, that due to climate change, nobody will be able to live here anymore. Now, the problem with this extreme of an opinion on the climate is that God has made a promise that he will not destroy the entire earth, that things will continue, right? So such a claim as this, that we are going to make the earth uninhabitable, is not taking into account what God has promised. Now, the fact that they are not taking this into account might cause some of us to take a different extreme, to say, aha, so we have nothing to worry about, right? Actually, if you study some of the climate change data, there have been some interesting articles to come out about the history of climate change. Here are two of them. It seems that, according to the journal Science Advances and Climate Change, neither of which are Christian publications by any stretch of the imagination, it seems that if you study the rise and fall of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, climate actually had something to do with that. Now that's kind of interesting. How do we know about the Neo-Assyrian Empire? Does that ring a bell? Bingo, right? Whenever we read the biblical narrative of some of Israel going to Babylon, the rest going to Assyria, it seems that God used the climate to enable Assyria to rise to the occasion. It's also interesting that it seems that the climate was an instrument that God used to collapse the empires whenever he was done with them. So if we try to pretend as if climate cannot affect us in any way, we're actually missing some really interesting data that actually aligns with what the Bible says. But by no means should we be concerned that God is going to allow the earth to burn up into a ball before he is done with it. That's simply not going to happen. God has designed the earth in a way that it's able to adjust accordingly whenever certain things happen. Okay, so moving along. Then God blessed Noah and his sons, this is chapter 9, and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. The fear of you and the terror of you will be on every animal of the earth and on every bird of the sky, on everything that crawls on the ground and on all the fish of the sea. They are handed over to you. The moving thing that is alive shall be food for you. I have given everything to you as I have given the green plant, but you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is, its blood. Okay, so what's happening here? God is now moving man into a position where we are able to consume meat. Previously, we were allowed to consume plants. Now we can have meat. Does this mean that no animals would eat meat prior to the flood? It does not. It means that man was not allowed to eat meat. Does that mean that man did not eat meat prior to the flood? Also, no. It very well could have been the case that men were cannibals prior to the flood, right? That would have been sinful, right? So we are seeing a change of relationship between man and animal. The comfort that we had with animals in the Garden of Eden is no more. However, we look forward to a day when the curse will be curtailed and the child will be able to play with the serpent, following the description of the Messianic kingdom in the book of Isaiah. Now we have this interesting little bit here. You shall not eat flesh with its life, that is, its blood. What does that mean? The Jewish interpreters, who are constantly trying to put a fence around the Torah and then a fence around that, they keep increasing more and more traditions and laws, have done so in a way that whenever you buy a kosher chicken today, all of the blood has been drained out, and they've salted it to make sure any little bit of blood has gotten out. I think that's a bit overkill. Whenever we have this phrase, you shall not eat flesh with its life, I tend to think that that is in reference to not eating flesh that has living blood inside, the way that animals do. Dane insisted that I give you a graphic warning. If you're a sissy, look away. Otherwise, here is an example of the way that animals will consume each other. We have a pack of African wild dogs eating an impala while the impala is still alive. This would be an example of what it looks like whenever you eat something with living blood inside. This is not comfortable for the impala if you have not figured out yet. This is animalistic. If you look, they are tearing apart the baby impala that was inside of the pregnant impala while she is still alive, okay? When the Bible says do not eat flesh with its blood, I think this animal-like behavior is what it's talking about. It's talking about we need to treat animals ethically, slaughter them ethically without pain to the extent that we can before we consume them. All right, Genesis 9, 5 through 7. I will certainly require your lifeblood. From every animal I require it, and from every person. So we are allowed to kill animals to consume. Animals are not allowed to consume us. And from every person, from every man as his brother, I will require the life of a person. And he says, whoever sheds human blood, by man his blood shall be shed. For in the image of God he made mankind. So the impala was not created in God's image, so we don't have to kill the dogs that ate her. If those dogs were to attack a person, we would kill the dogs. Does that make sense? This is again an affirmation that we humans are above nature, being image bearers of God, with still the responsibility not to tear apart a baby impala out of his mother's womb. We also see the basis for government. Whenever one man kills another man, that man who killed him must be killed. That implies a system of courts to understand who it was that is the murderer, and a system for performing the execution. And then we have a restatement of this one. As for you, be fruitful and multiply, populate the earth abundantly, and multiply in it. Then God spoke to Noah and his sons with him, saying, now, behold, I myself am establishing my covenant with you. This is why we call it the Noahic Covenant. We have the verbiage of a covenant right here in plain sight. Noah is the one party of the covenant, but let's count who else is a party of the covenant. I'm establishing my covenant with you and with your descendants after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the livestock, and every animal of the earth with you. Of all that comes out of the ark, every animal of the earth. I established my covenant with you, and all flesh shall never again be eliminated by the waters of a flood, nor shall there again be a flood to destroy the earth. So, Who is the party of the Noahic Covenant? Is it only Noah? No, it's not. Correct. It is not. It is lottie-dottie everybody, not only humans, not only image bearers of God, but also all of the animals. This is an ongoing covenant. Ever since the covenant was established, the Noahic Covenant remains in effect. We are still allowed to eat meat. We're not obligated to eat, but we may. We are still obligated to establish courts of justice. And then it continues. God said, "This is a sign of the covenant which I am making between me and you and every living creature that is with you for all future generations." This is ongoing. "I have set my rainbow in the cloud, and it shall serve as a sign of the covenant." So whenever you see a rainbow, you remember the covenant. Does the Bible say that that is the first time there was ever a rainbow? No, it does not. The rainbow is simply a really beautiful phenomenon. In fact, it is so powerful that even Kermit the Frog has sung about it. And there's no reason to suspect that the refraction of light that causes rainbows was not a normal phenomenon prior to the flood. People who attack the Bible will try to say that that is a biblical claim. It simply is not. God is taking a symbol or something that was already in existence and making it a symbol of something to remember whenever you see it. Likewise, Jesus, whenever he took the bread and the cup, he uses that as a sign of a covenant. But wine and bread were in the picture long before that occurred. Okay? All right. Now, that's the Noahic Covenant we just looked at. Okay? We see the establishment of civil governments. Then in a few chapters later, we get into the narrative of the Tower of Babel. God said, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth." So everybody said, "Okie dokie, artichoke." And that's what they did, right? They spread out nice and peacefully, established courts, had children all over the planet, right? Wrong. That is not how it went down. Now all the earth used the same language and the same words. And it came about as they journeyed east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. Then they said to one another, "Come, let's scatter around because that's what God told us to do," right? Also wrong. "Come, let us make bricks and fire them thoroughly." And they used brick for stone, and they used tar for mortar. And they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top will reach into heaven, and let us make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered abroad over the face of the earth." Now the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the men had built. And the Lord said, "Behold, they are one people, and they all have the same language. And this is what they have started to do. And now nothing which they plan to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down there and let us confuse their language so that they will not understand one another's speech." So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of the earth, and they stopped building the city. Therefore it was called Babel, because the Lord confused the language of all the earth. And from there, the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of the earth. Okay. So language is the mechanism that God used to push people apart. There is an interesting passage in the Song of Moses at the end of Deuteronomy that expands on some other activity that God was involved in here whenever he scattered people from Babel. Deuteronomy 32:8 is the key passage. I'll start in verse 7. Moses says, "Remember the days of old. Consider the years of many generations. Ask your father, and he will show you your elders, and they will tell you. When the Most High divided their inheritance to the nations, when he separated the sons of Adam, when was that?" Babel, right? Genesis 11. That's referring to the same event we just looked at. There is not another event that could be in mind here. It says, "He set boundaries of the people according to the number of the children of Israel. For the Lord's portion is his people. Jacob is the place of his inheritance." Okay, now this follows the Masoretic text. In the Masoretic text, we have that phrase, "according to the number of the children of Israel." I think that this is an accurate representation of what Moses wrote. There are other theologians who disagree. A lot of liberals will do anything to disagree with the Masoretic text. I swear, I look at some of their arguments, I'm like, eh. But this is one that even conservatives will argue over, because there are some texts that say, according to the number, not of the sons of Israel, but the sons of God. In some forms of the Septuagint, it says, according to the number of the angels of God. So some say we should follow the Septuagint, so that God divided according to the number of the fallen angels, basically. One problem with that is, how many countries have we had on earth at any given time, right? Jesus had access to more than a dozen legions of angels. He said so in Matthew 26:53. Daniel 10:20 speaks in the singular of the prince of Persia and the singular prince of Greece, as if there's a leading fallen angel above all of the nations. If the number of angels that fall were 50-50, then you would end up with 12 legions of angels. That doesn't seem like the right number. What's more, even the Septuagint, the Greek translation that would support that view, itself has several textual variants, many of which would affirm the Masoretic, the Hebrew text. And what's more, there are other texts outside of the Masoretic that do affirm the sons of Israel. Maybe the most significant being the Samaritan text, which typically has an anti-Israel bent in several spots, but even here it says, yeah, it's according to the sons of Israel. Okay, so what does that mean? Whenever God divided the inheritance, he set boundaries of the people according to the number of the sons of Israel. I take that as God set up countries. Whenever he spread out the people, he set physical barriers between them to serve as borders between countries to defend the countries, but in a way that people could still get around, because Israel is to be a light to the nations, and so Israel is still able to traverse and tell the world about God. And Dane made an interesting presentation earlier this year at Schaefer about potential contact between the Jews and Japan, which would align very well with what we're seeing here in Deuteronomy. Okay, so how does this work? So we have the ark, we have the flood, and then we have the Noahic Covenant. That's ongoing, okay? However, something new enters the scene, the Tower of Babel, right? We're supposed to establish civil governments. At the Tower of Babel, that's where we get the separation of people, followed by the establishment of borders. And in that context, we need to have the establishment of civil governments, and that is the basis for this social unit, the country, okay? A country is a chunk of land with borders, with a civil government over it for the protection of the people within that land. Okie dokie, 3 components: land and a government to protect the people in the land. All right? So, what does this have to do with like cosmology and geology and all that fun stuff? We've looked at the social ontology. Attached in your handout is what we would call a geologic time scale. Okay, and it divides the rock layers into various periods and epochs and whatnot. Now, when you look at the rocks, there are indeed layers on top of each other, and I think it is legitimate to label each of these layers and to classify them into groups. However, the age of the layers, I think, is a bit exaggerated. We're working with the assumption here that the Earth is billions of years old whenever they put those ages down. However, I think if we look at the Bible, it would indicate that the world is only a matter of thousands of years old. So we can divide these big eras into 4 significant chunks: the Cenozoic, the Mesozoic, the Paleozoic, and the Precambrian. And we can stack them on top of each other like so. Now, one of the basic principles in geology is the principle of superposition. That means that the oldest layers are at the bottom and the youngest layers are on top. And that kind of makes sense, right? if you lay down one layer of dirt, and then another layer of dirt, and then another layer of dirt, you're not going to remove a couple of layers, put down a new layer, and then put those back on top, right? No, they just stack on top of each other. This can help us get a relative age of the rocks, okay? Relative to this layer, this is a young layer, but that doesn't tell us how old the rocks are, okay? The big dispute then comes down to uniformitarianism or catastrophism. Uniformitarianism is the assumption that just as everything is moving along today, that's how it has always been. And because we have very slow rates of change today, we can assume that the world is very old in order to have all these layers. The problem is that that's not quite how it works. Some of you may remember Mount St. Helens eruption back in 1980. Looking around, judging by the number of gray hairs and bald heads, being as how we were in Washington, some of you remember this, right? Well, whenever you look at the aftermath, what are we seeing? We're seeing several layers of rocks laid upon each other. We're seeing growth coming back. We're seeing very slow, gradual change where the river is, right? We wouldn't look at this and assume that it's millions of years old because we can actually put a date back in 1980. This is a picture, a screenshot from the documentary Is Genesis History? I recommend watching it on YouTube sometime. We have recently translated that into Ukrainian, so Ukrainian subtitles should be available on the little app soon. Okay. So we have these various eras. Now, if we were to grow or shrink these according to how much time the secularists say that these various eras existed, the Precambrian is supposed to be 4 billion years old. Then the Paleozoic is 298 million, Mesozoic 186 million, and then Cenozoic, where we are, is wee little bitty bitty 66 million years. I think those numbers are a little bit off. I think the Cenozoic is about 5,500. Mesozoic and Paleozoic were put down by the flood over the course of about a year. And the Precambrian is about 1,656 years. So we can adjust it to look something like this. This is what it might look like if we were to size them proportionately according to the Masoretic text for how long they were there. Okay, that by way of illustration to show what we're dealing with. So what is it that we're talking about? All of these rocks were put down at different times. There are different models in place among creation scientists for when these were put there, but I tend to be of the school of thought that the Precambrian rocks, which have very few fossils in them, these were probably put there by God during the creation week. So the ground would have been in this era whenever Adam was created. And whenever Noah walked the earth, it would have been on top of that. So prior to the flood, that's where they were, on the Precambrian. And Noah constructed a ship as God told him, and I imagine everybody laughed because why are you building a ship on top of this Precambrian layer? It's not like we're going to have some Cambrian explosion, right? But sure enough, the rain starts to come down. Now, what happens when the rain comes down? It's not just water coming down. The Bible describes the fountain of the deep gushing forth. And the water begins to rise. And we also see changes to the earth down below. And as that happens, certain organisms that are less inclined to get to the higher ground eventually drift off, and then they get covered by the rocks. And then the water increases and more animals get sucked into it. Some of them are deposited into rock layers, some of them are not. And the water continues to rise, and eventually everything is covered up so that the highest point of the flood would be right here between the Cretaceous and Paleocene at the KPG extinction event. Some creationists might put it a little bit higher or a little bit lower. That's not too significant for our purposes today. But at any rate, rock layers keep getting distributed and deposited, And finally, the water comes down, and the ark lands in the Ararat Mountains. Noah comes out of the ship, builds an altar as we've just seen, and we're still living in the aftermath of the flood, and the earth keeps changing and so forth. And we see rocks still coming up as plates are colliding, and we see erosion happening. So, in this model, and there are other models for a global flood, we would put the pre-flood flood boundary right there at the Precambrian, so that everything below the Precambrian is what was there whenever Adam and his successors prior to the flood walked the earth. Everything in the Paleozoic and Mesozoic, all of those rocks would have been laid down during the flood. And then after the flood, we get the Cenozoic. Okay? Makes sense? Clear? All right. There's not going to be a test. So if you forget the difference between the Mississippian and the Pennsylvanian chunks of the Paleozoic, don't worry. You're going to be okay. Just remember, the newer rocks are at top, and the older rocks are at the bottom. So, our topic is the Noahic Covenant. This raises the question then, since the Cenozoic, way up here at the top, is post-flood, at what point in the fossil record do we see the Babel dispersion? Can we see a Babel dispersion? This is where it starts to get kind of funky, right? So there's the Cenozoic. Here is a really nifty app, the Paleo Bio Database, paleobiodb.org/navigator. If you're a fossil nerd, this is where you spend your free time. You can input a particular fossil or group of fossils, and it'll show you where these fossils have been dug up. This is kind of a new technology that wasn't available a couple generations ago. But here we have a chart where various cockroach fossils have been found. And those nasty little buggers are all over the place. You'll notice that there are different locations and different colors, right? Here is a scale showing you where the different colors would align, right? So what are we seeing here? A little purple, so that's in the Triassic era right there. Blue is Jurassic, which is not where T-Rex lived. He does not belong in Jurassic Park. He should be in like late Cretaceous Park, but the authors didn't ask for my opinion on that, so I'll let it go. And we see them in the Cenozoic. Okay, so that's where cockroaches are around the earth and in different layers of rock, okay? Oh, goodness, what is this? Okay. What are these? These are antelope, from a couple of families of antelope. Now, antelope are around the world today. We got them in Africa. We got them in North America. Currently, the only antelope that we have in the area is which one? The pronghorn antelope. Yes, in the back there. The pronghorn antelope. Beautiful little animal, right? You see them running around doing the antelope thing. Now, that's the only one that survives today. It's from the Antilocapridae family of antelopes. This is a couple of different family of antelopes. Now, if we pull up the map and look at where those two family of antelopes that lived in North America have their fossils, all of the fossils are here in Canada, America, down into Mexico, right, down in Panama. So there's kind of a range where they are geographically. There's also kind of a range where they are in terms of rock layers, right? You see how they're all yellow? That's because they're all in the Cenozoic, right? So this is zooming in on the United States, and here they are in the Paleogene. That's where we see all of those antelopes in the Paleogene. That's right here. lower half of the Cenozoic. Here they are in the Neogene, which is kind of the middle part of the Cenozoic. And here they are in the Quaternary, which is our current geological age, if you will. Okay, so you see a continuity of the antelope, right? Across that period, there are antelopes living there. So, what does that inform us? That would inform us that the flood would have been prior to the antelope taking up residence here in America, right? Either there was a flood and then the antelope came over here, or the antelope were here and then they all got wiped out in the flood, and then the antelope left the ark and returned to their ancestral homelands. And that ain't no kind of behavior for an antelope. So we can put the flood earlier than that, okay? So the next time you see a pronghorn antelope in Tacoma, you can think to yourself, well, this guy suggests a post-flood boundary that is at least below the Neogene. Okay, so that would put down here somewhere at least the flood, right? That's when the antelope occupy the area. All right, and there are reasons to put a little bit lower or a little bit higher, but we don't want to mess up our antelope continuity. So let's zoom in on this section and look at the dispersion of human fossils. Well, the first question that we have to deal with is, what exactly is a human? And there are a couple of ways to do this, to look at a fossil and decide if it's a human. One way, the nerdiest way perhaps, is through barometrological distance measurements. This is when a paleontologist, and I have friends like this, and they're so different. I love them. They're great. But they measure all the different, angles and everything, and they say, okay, well, a gorilla has a bigger leg here because he does gorilla things. Humans are measured like this. And they put up charts to figure out statistically which sorts of fossils are more likely to be human and which are more likely to be non-humans. Okay, that's one way about it. And if you want to see the study, you can go to this link. I've got a bibliography in the back if you feel like looking up the neat studies on human barometrological distance measuring. But another way is found in a paper by these three gentlemen, Ross, Brummel, and Wood, personal friends of mine. I love them. They're great guys. And they say, if you look at where some of these fossils were living, you can discern the image of God within the fossil record. What do they mean by that? They identified these 6 traits, which you can see in the area where Homo erectus and Neanderthal man lived, and Homo sapiens. And there are 6 categories of evidence that would signify advanced human cognition. These are not things that animals do, only things that humans do. That would be the controlled use of fire, right? A chimpanzee doesn't make fire to cook things on. The manufacture of advanced tools. Monkeys might bang rocks together, but humans will form glue to make tools, right? The crafting of unnecessary objects that attest to artistic creativity or preferences. Care for the wounded or elderly. An elephant's not going to break his leg and then have all the other elephants come together to build a splint for it. Intentional burial of the dead. Complex behaviors associated with dispersal or even exploration, such as accessing cave chambers far from the cave entrance or accessing islands. So, by putting these categories of advanced human cognition together, they identified several fossils that they believe are human. They also used the nerdy statistics analysis. And if we go back to our tool, we can see where the earliest humans are in the record. So here we are in the Pleistocene, And you can see all of these Homo naledi's, Homo habilis, Homo erectus, all of these descendants of Adam in their earliest dispersal. Okay, do you see what I'm getting at? When you look at what geological era, the geological time that humans first disperse, we can use that information to understand more or less when the Tower of Babel occurred, because they weren't dispersing prior to that. And these are not before the flood, because antelope don't just return to their ancestral homelands. So this would be evidence that suggests when the Tower of Babel occurred. Okay, we can add Homo sapien to it, and that will give us an even broader dispersion that's more recent. So it seems that the Tower of Babel occurred in the Pleistocene section of the rock record. Okie dokie, way up here up top. All right, that's the main point we're trying to deal with, because we want to get to the Noahic Covenant and its effects in the Tower of Babel. So now the next question is, because the Tower of Babel event occurred during the Pleistocene, what did the world look like around that time? Here is a map that would reconstruct it. This is the peak of the last glacial maximum during the late Pleistocene. So it seems that this is when the Ice Age was. Maybe it became a greater Ice Age even in the days after the dispersion. But what happens whenever you have an Ice Age? More ice means less water in the oceans, right? What's one of the big fears about global warming right now? It's that we'll melt the ice caps. And if the ice melts, then the water rises, and that sinks all of the cities. Some cities, I'm not particularly of the opinion they shouldn't be sunk. I probably shouldn't say that up here whenever we're pretty close to water, right? Okay, I take that back. I'll save that joke for whenever I'm in like Arkansas or the Midwest or something. Redact that one from the record. I'm joking. Okay, so more ice means more land, right? So we can zoom in to the Middle East where the Tower of Babel likely was. And now we're seeing, what are we seeing? We're seeing land that can go almost all the way down to Australia. You could probably walk to North America. So whenever the dispersion occurs from Babel, man is able to disperse and get across large areas of land. And that's kind of what we see aligned with in the earlier map from the Paleo database. Okay, so we have great amounts of land and we're able to disperse. Compared to that, right, that is around the time of the Tower of Babel, here's what it looks like today. Okay, do you see the difference? The ice has melted, the water has come up. It's almost as if after man disperses, he gets into spots where all of a sudden he has boundaries between them. Do you see what I'm getting at? Wouldn't that align very well with what we're reading back in Deuteronomy 32:8? After God disperses the people using languages, he uses climate activity to set up boundaries to separate the people. Now we have water separating us. Okay, well that's a big picture of giant bodies of water. Here is a final map, if you will, of all of the countries on Earth with their current boundaries. Now, if you look at the barriers between them, they are all borders that are squiggly, to use the technical term squiggly. Why are they squiggly instead of straight? Typically, there are some straight lines, but why do we have more squigglies? Because we typically use rivers to differentiate between countries, right? Physical boundaries. So the Rio Grande down in South Texas separates America from Mexico, right? So it's not only the rising of the oceans, it's not only the mountains, but it's also the squigglies of the rivers that keep them apart. And indeed, historically, crossing rivers has been a very dangerous activity to do if you are doing so with ill intent. We have numerous artifacts from antiquity of various water battles that end up very bloody. And in fact, even more recently, we have giant field manuals published by the U.S. Army about tactics, and even an entire book written in 2008 about crossing like gaps with rivers and stuff, because it's so stinking dangerous even today. So it seems that God separates the people and then allows water barriers as well as other natural barriers to provide for those borders so that the country can be defended while still allowing for people to come in and out of the country in peace, with an emphasis of Israel being able to get out and tell people about God. Okay, so we have looked at social ontology. We've looked at God's design for society in terms of the individual, the family, and the country. And we've looked at some of the geological differences and changes to the climate, as well as other catastrophes that well could have occurred as a result of the Tower of Babel incident, which ultimately traces into the Noahic Covenant and God's command to establish civil governments for the protection of the image of God. Here is a bibliography that's all on the back if you're interested in looking up some of the sources